Noah had always liked quiet nights. His apartment, tucked away on the fifth floor of an old city building, offered exactly that kind of tranquility. By midnight, the constant hum of the street below would fade into a distant memory, leaving only the gentle creaks of the aging pipes and the soft, ambient buzz of the street lamp just outside his window. It was a life defined by peace, predictability, and a comforting sense of safety. Or at least, that's what he had always believed. Everything changed 3 weeks after a new tenant moved into the unit directly across the hall. He never got a proper look at her. The only reason he knew her name was because of the small, neat white card slipped into the slot on her mailbox. It simply read, Evelyn. Sometimes, he'd hear faint signs of her presence. The soft padding of footsteps late at night, the quiet, precise click of her lock turning. It was all perfectly normal, nothing that would ever raise an alarm. That is, until the first time he looked through the peephole. It was nearly 2 a.m. Noah had been winding down, watching a movie, when he thought he heard someone whispering just outside his door. The sound was incredibly faint, like the soft rustle of fabric brushing against the wooden frame. His curiosity got the better of him. He crept to the door and pressed his eye to the small glass lens. For a split second, his heart seized in his chest. Across the hall, a thin sliver of light glowed from underneath Evelyn's door. And then, in an instant, it went dark. He quickly rationalized it away. It was nothing. Maybe she dropped something. Maybe the light just flickered. He tried to brush it off and went back to his movie. But the following night, at the exact same time, the same thing happened again. The light under her door was on, and then, just as before, it vanished. This time, though, he saw something else. He saw movement, a shape, a silhouette, standing just behind her door. Someone positioned just close enough for their shadow to fall across that thin line of light, momentarily blocking it before it disappeared completely. He backed away from the peephole, his mind racing, telling himself not to overthink it, not to create a mystery where there wasn't one. But when he cautiously returned to the door a minute later, the shadow was still there, cast on the floor in the hallway, completely, unnervingly still. The next morning, Noah left for work earlier than usual, a strange sense of unease still lingering. As he passed Evelyn's apartment, he noticed something odd. The doormat positioned neatly outside her door was damp, not just a little wet, like from a spilled drink, but saturated, as if someone had been standing on it, dripping water, for hours. By the end of that week, the noises began. It started as a light scratching sound, coming from the other side of his own front door, and it was precise. It happened at exactly 2:14 a.m. every single night. At first, he did his best to ignore it, pulling his pillow over his head, convinced it was just the old building settling. But one night, the sound was more persistent. He crawled out of bed, held his breath, and pressed his ear flat against the cold wood of the door. He could swear he heard breathing shallow and raspy on the other side. On the 6th night, he couldn't take it anymore. He decided he needed proof, something to convince himself he wasn't just losing his mind. He took his phone, started a voice recording, and left it on the small table right by the entrance, before forcing himself to go to bed. The next morning, his hands trembled as he picked up the phone and played the audio file. The scratching was there, just as he remembered, faint but undeniable. It was followed by a series of faint, almost inaudible whispers. Then, a voice emerged from the static. It was soft, eerily calm, and it felt so close, it was almost like it was coming from inside his own head. It said 2 simple words. Open the door. A chilling coldness washed over him, turning his stomach to ice. That was it. He had to do something. He stormed down to the lobby later that day and confronted the landlord, Mr. Hayes, demanding to know more about the woman named Evelyn. The old man, who had seen just about everything in his years managing the building, simply frowned, his brow furrowed in confusion. Son, that apartment's been empty for months, he said, his voice firm. No one's living in 5B, Noah insisted. He described the sounds, the damp mat, the card on the mailbox. He told him someone was there. Reluctantly, Mr. Hayes grabbed a set of keys and agreed to go check. Mostly, it seemed, just to appease him. When they arrived at the apartment across the hall, the landlord inserted the key. As the door swung inward, a rush of stale, cold air washed over them. The room was dark, completely empty, and coated in a thick, uniform layer of dust. The floorboards groaned under their weight as they stepped inside. "See?" Mr. Hayes said, gesturing around the vacant space. "Told you, no one's here." But Noah wasn't listening. He wasn't even looking at the landlord. His eyes were fixed, locked onto the far wall of the empty apartment. There, drilled neatly into the plaster, was a small, perfectly circular hole. It was just wide enough for an eye to fit through, and it was positioned directly across from where his own front door would be. Mr. Hayes, now visibly unsettled himself, promised to call maintenance to seal the wall immediately. But that night, sleep was impossible for Noah. The air in his own apartment felt wrong, heavy and suffocating. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, every creak and groan of the building amplified in the silence. And then, right on schedule, at around 2:14 a.m., the sound came again, that familiar scratching. Seemingly right behind his headboard this time, as if it was coming from inside the wall. He snapped. In a surge of adrenaline and fear, he grabbed his phone, switched on the flashlight, and lunged for his front door, yanking it open with all his might. The hallway was empty. No one was there. But then he saw it. Across the hall, Evelyn's door, the door to the empty apartment, stood slightly ajar. He stepped forward slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Evelyn," he called out, his voice trembling, barely a whisper. There was no answer. He reached her door, his hand shaking as he pushed it wider, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the oppressive darkness inside. And then he froze. Inside the dark, empty apartment, the wall that faced his own unit had been torn open. A gaping hole revealed a small, hidden crawl space between their apartments, a narrow void he never knew existed. And inside it, he saw stacks and stacks of old photographs, pinned haphazardly to the rotting wood beams. They were all of him. Photos of him sleeping in his bed, eating dinner at his table, sitting by his window, looking down at the street. And there, on the dusty floor of the crawl space, lay a small, folded piece of paper. With his light still shaking, he could just make out the single word written on it in neat, deliberate handwriting: "Smile." The cabin in the woods. Mira always believed isolation would make her a better writer. After months of city noise, endless deadlines, and people talking over her thoughts, the silence of the forest felt like freedom. The cabin she rented sat deep in the Oregon woods, miles from the nearest town. It had a single room, a small kitchen, a fireplace, and large windows that looked out into the trees. It was perfect. On her first night there, she stayed up late, typing. The forest hummed with crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. When she finally turned in, she felt at peace for the first time in years. But peace rarely lasts. The next morning, she found something strange. Faint fingerprints smudged across the glass of the front window. 5 of them, pressed firmly into the center of the pane. She told herself it was nothing. Maybe the last tenant had touched it before leaving. She wiped it clean and went back to work. That night, she woke up to the sound of something shifting outside. It was slow, deliberate, like someone dragging their feet through leaves. She turned on her lamp and glanced toward the window. Nothing. The woods looked still. But then she saw it, a faint reflection, not her own, but another face staring back at her from outside the glass. She gasped and stumbled back, knocking over the lamp. By the time she got to the window, the figure was gone. Her heart pounded as she locked the door and shut the curtains. The next morning, she checked the window again. New handprints, larger this time. She called Jonas, the local handyman, who had helped her move in, and told him someone was sneaking around the property. He arrived that afternoon, checked the perimeter, and shrugged. "No footprints, no tire marks," he said. "Maybe a deer pressed against the glass. They get curious." Mira didn't argue, but she knew the difference between a deer and a hand. For the next few nights, she left her phone camera recording while she slept. Every morning she checked the footage, but it only showed darkness. Until the 4th night, She woke up to a thud against a wall near her bed, heart racing. She grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam caught something under the bed, a small glint of metal. She crouched down and froze. It was the corner of a rusted camera lens pointing toward her. Myra screamed and jumped back, shoving the bed aside. Beneath the floorboards was a narrow opening, a crawl space barely wide enough for a person to fit. A damp smell of earth and sweat rose from it. She could see blankets, empty food wrappers, and a flashlight that had died long ago. Someone had been living under her floor. Her phone slipped from her trembling hands as she backed away. She ran outside into the freezing night, dialing the police. When they arrived, they searched the crawl space in the woods around the cabin. They found a sleeping bag, a lighter, and a small notebook. Inside the notebook were pages filled with jagged writing, sketches of her sitting by the window, eating and sleeping. Beneath each drawing, the same line, repeated again and again. "You look better when you're scared." The officers told her to pack her things and leave immediately. They promised to keep patrols nearby until they found whoever had been living there. But Myra couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. Even as she gathered her laptop and clothes, she felt eyes on her back. She turned, scanning the trees outside. The branches swayed, but nothing moved. She decided to take one last look at the footage from the previous night before she left. She sat in her car, phone in hand, and pressed play. The video began as usual, her asleep in bed, the cabin dark and quiet. Then, at 3:02 a.m., movement. From the shadowed corner of the room, a figure slowly crawled out from under the floorboards. It stood beside her bed, tall and thin, head tilting as if studying her face. After a long pause, it crouched beside her and reached a hand toward her cheek. The figure whispered something too soft to hear, then turned and crawled back under the floor. Myra dropped the phone, her hands shaking violently. She looked up at the cabin one last time before driving away. Through the window, she thought she saw movement, a pale hand pressing against the glass. But this time, the hand wasn't on the outside. It was inside, reaching out as if to wave goodbye. The mirror in room 19. Eli was exhausted when he pulled off the highway. The rain had been relentless all night, pounding against the windshield until his eyes blurred. He'd been driving for hours, chasing a business deal that had already fallen through. All he wanted was a bed, a shower, and silence. The sign for the roadside motel appeared through the rain like a flickering ghost. Interview in vacancies. It looked old, the kind of place that hadn't seen new paint since the 1980s. But at that hour, it was good enough. The lobby was empty, except for a woman at the front desk. She was pale, with tired eyes and a faint smile. Her Namo tag read Clara. "Just one night?" she asked. "Yeah," Eli said, signing the ledger. "Long drive?" "Room 19, she said, handing him a brass key. "Into the hall. Try not to mind the thunder. Power flickers sometimes." The hall was dim and smelled faintly of damp carpet. When he reached his room, Eli noticed something odd right away. The mirror on the far wall faced directly toward the bed. It was tall, framed in dark wood, and slightly tilted forward, like it was leaning in to watch. He unpacked, showered, and tried to sleep. The rain softened to a drizzle, and the only sound was the low hum of the heater. But just as his eyes began to close, a faint tap echoed from somewhere in the room. Tap, pause, tap, tap. He sat up, staring into the dark. The noise came again, this time softer like fingernails against glass. Eli turned on the bedside lamp. The sound stopped. His eyes fell on the mirror. Something about his reflection looked off. His posture, his expression, it didn't match. He raised his hand. His reflection raised it too, but just a second late. A shiver crawled up his spine. "Great," he muttered. "I'm overtired." He threw a towel over the mirror and turned off the light. When he woke later that night, the towel was gone. The mirror stood uncovered. His reflection stared back, but the bed behind him was empty. The reflection smiled. Eli's chest tightened. He jumped up, flicked on the lamp, and stumbled to the door. The knob wouldn't turn. It felt jammed, like someone was holding it from the other side. His reflection was still smiling. "Clara," he shouted, banging on the door. "Hey, is someone out there?" Silence. He turned back to the mirror and saw something behind his reflection. A figure, barely visible in the darkness, standing where his reflection's bed should be. Tall, thin, motionless. Eli grabbed the nearest chair and swung it at the mirror. The glass cracked, spiderwebbing outward before shattering into 1,000 pieces. He fell backward, breathing hard. Behind the broken mirror was a hollow space. He shone his phone light inside and froze. There was a small metal stool and an old camera mounted on a tripod. Its lens pointed directly through the hole in the wall. Wires ran down into the floor, disappearing beneath the boards. Someone had been recording him. He stumbled back, bile rising in his throat. The thought of someone sitting there, hidden just feet away, made his skin crawl. He ran to the door again, and this time it opened easily. The hallway was empty, lights flickering. He sprinted to the lobby. The front desk was dark. The sign-in book opened to his name. The chair behind the counter was empty, but on the counter sat a small black and white monitor, still glowing. It was showing live footage of room 19. He stared at the screen. The room was dark, the bed empty, but in the reflection of the broken mirror, someone was standing. He leaned closer. The figure in the reflection turned its head slowly toward the camera, as if it could see him. Its mouth curled into a grin. The monitor flickered and went black. Eli backed away, heart racing. The lobby door was locked tight. He grabbed the nearest object, a lamp, and smashed the glass, crawling out into the cold rain. He ran to his car, fumbling for the keys, not daring to look back as he drove off. The motel shrank in the distance, its lights dimming behind the rain. But when he glanced in the rearview mirror, his blood ran cold. In the reflection of the back seat, something moved, a faint outline of a face, pale, smiling, pressed against the glass. Right behind him, the rain drowned out his scream as he sped into the night.